So Eric, we were talking about, the top guy in WWE and what a great problem it is to have this many guys that are over in the WWE. And I saw something that I shared with you on Reddit over the weekend that I was fascinated by. It was, believe it or not, and just bear with me here, Eric. It was a conversation from Dave Meltzer. And I know you don't like Dave Meltzer. However, he pointed out AEW, they have so many people under contract. Joe Silva, who by the way is the former UFC matchmaker and Hall of Famer, would tell me we could have 300 people and 50 people under contract. We're still only going to have 10 stars either way because you can get only a certain number of people over. WWE understands this. And in the recap, it's written here. Dave says AEW doesn't need to keep adding guys to their TV, even if they're good. Dave says AEW has so many guys that are good and can have good matches, but quote, they're all over the place. He compares it to a UFC Saturday night show where he says the fighters are all good and the fights are all good, but quote, unless you're super hardcore, you don't care about any of them because they're not big names, end quote. Dave wants to see AEW focus on their core guys and help them get really over and become stars. And I sent this to you because I know that you dealt with this on the WCW side of things. And we've talked about that a long time, about how loaded you were at the top. You had Goldberg, you had Sting, you had Lex Luger, you had Ric Flair, you had Kevin Nash, you had Macho Man, you had DDP, on and on and on and on. You had those handful of 10 super over stars. And yes, you had a really strong tag division. And yes, you had great international talent. And yes, the cruiserweight matches were incredible. But the people who were really the needle movers were like those top 10 guys. And even when we take a look at like the top merch sellers this year for WWE, somehow John Cena and Stone Cold are still on the list. And yes, they're there with Roman Reigns and LA Knight and Cody Rhodes. But the point is there's only so much capacity, if you will, to have fans care about so many guys. And that was something we've never really pinpointed, but to hear a UFC guy, Joe Silva, say, we're only going to have 10 guys over. I thought, damn, I got to talk about that with Eric. What do you think about Joe Silva's comment? Whether we got 50 guys in the UFC or 300, no matter what, we're only going to have 10 guys over.
Yeah. And what's interesting is Dave makes these comments and, there's no arguing with the premise of what he wrote, but what Dave doesn't do and isn't capable of doing is, he'll say, well, you got to get more guys over. Well, how the fuck do you do that? How do you get more guys over, Dave? How do you get one guy over? And Dave's whole angle on what makes a good booker, i.e. Tony Khan being Booker of the Year for 2 years in a row, absent any cohesive story, compelling stories, absent anything that looks like disciplined, well-executed, creative structure. It's just random throwing dream matches up against the wall for no apparent reason, to pop a number or to get this is also a verified, what is it? Verified, does he call it? Whatever, a well-deserved, this is awesome champ. Like, that's not getting guys over. Getting guys over is not only identifying the talent that has the charisma as well as the athletic ability. Athletic ability is important. In Dave's world, it's the most important. In my world, it's number 2 or 3. Because unless you've got charisma, that intangible magic that separates all those who can from those who become, anybody can learn, not anybody, because I've tried, anybody can learn how to play guitar if you're committed. What makes Stevie Ray Vaughan? What made B.B. King? What made Jimi Hendrix? And there are special people that have that magic, and you have to be able to identify it. And it's not based on what appears to be more often than not Olympic level floor gymnastics. It's that charisma combined with the athletic ability. I'm not shitting on that, but charisma first, and you have to have story. You're never going to get anybody over unless you put as much time and effort and discipline into creating a well-crafted story with an arc, with an intentional destination and a payoff that's going to create a massive amount of emotion in the fan base. That's what it takes. And that's the opposite of everything that Dave puts over. His 5-star match thing is just about the intensity and I guess the volume of high flying aerial athleticism. It's not what gets people over. And I agree with whoever the guy was from UFC. You know, you could put 3, again, I often, when I'm critical or critiquing or offering an alternative perspective, call it whatever you want it. I try not to be negative for the sake of being negative. That's not my deal. But a lot of what forms my opinion and creates some of the emotion when I'm expressing that opinion is what I've learned by making wrong decisions. Not just what I've learned making good decisions. I shouldn't say there's no value, but there's far more value in mistakes and choices that you recognize as not the right ones than there is in the recognizing the decisions you made that were very successful. I learn more from mistakes. I learn more from failures. I study it. I analyze it. I remind myself. I've been there. You know, in that long list of names that you gave, you left out Roddy Piper, you left out Hulk Hogan,
yeah.
You know, and there were others. You know, we had a whole cruiserweight division that were extremely talented, but at the very, very top, we were so dense, and that's what happens is you don't have the time, the television time, or, you know, if you've got 2 guys in a main event, and they're in your A story meaning it should get the most amount of television time throughout an episode consistently until that story has a resolution. But if you've got 2 of your top guys in your A story, and then you've got your B story coming up underneath it, let's throw LA Knight in that current kind of category because he's so over. You've got to give that guy television time because that's what the audience is demanding, right? And then you've got a C story, and then you've got a D story. Once you get into it, even with a 3-hour program on Raw, you start running out of time to do it effectively. And I'm not suggesting that every match should have a story because that's what, you know, the trolls are going to come out with, you know, after they hear this. Not every match can have a story because you don't have the time to dedicate to it. So you're going to have some, I'm calling it filler for lack of a better term right now because I can't think of it. But you're going to have matches that are designed really just to expose a talent, to try to get a talent a little more equity, a little more value to the audience, a little more experience perhaps. But they're not all going to have that well-crafted, disciplined arc because you don't have the time. And I think AEW is probably experiencing that, you know. Tony came out and said, I'm not going to make the same mistakes that Eric Bischoff did. Well, dude, yeah, you are. And then some, by the way.
Well, the thing.
So I agree with that. I just find it interesting how Meltzer, once the wheels are starting to fall off of AEW, he's kind of covering his ass by pointing out flaws. But in the meantime, he's been nothing but an advocate for them while calling himself a journalist.
A lot of
making
people
excuses for every aspect of their failures. Nah, they're not failures, but lack of progress.
A lot of folks have a theory that his, the way he's covered them has changed since Brawl Out. I haven't done enough investigating myself to really co-sign that, but it does feel like there's a shift in his coverage of AEW. And, you know, you said something a few minutes ago about how, you know, Dave was saying, hey, you just got to help some more guys get over. Well, how do you get somebody over? And I think the answer is pretty clear: television time. You know, you take a look at who is the quote unquote most over in AEW. It's MJF. He's also getting some of the most screen time. I'm not saying just one individual segment, but I'm saying threads throughout a show. I mean, it's not lost on me. John Cena was on every single show for 10 years. Therefore, John Cena, even when he's not actively wrestling anymore, is still in the top 10. And it's not like when you had Stone Cold on the show. Stone Cold will just come out for his one segment. No, there's going to be a thread. He's going to open with the promo. There's going to be some backstage skits, and he's going to do a run in, and then he's going to have a match. But you don't have that. You have a finite amount of TV time, but unfortunately it feels like you have an infinite roster at times. So you can't make everyone happy. So instead of everyone being able to get that MJF or Hulk Hogan treatment, take a look at the number of segments Hulk Hogan was in way back when on Nitro, when Nitro was at its peak. And people could be critical of that from a political standpoint and say, oh, he should be sharing the spotlight. Should he? Because
really,
because
dilute your show.
Well, my point was you're doing the best that, I mean, I had a conversation this past weekend with somebody who was pretty frustrated, with WWE and the way things have been going. And I'm like, well, this is as good as it's going to get. Like objectively, if you step away from creative and you just take a look at the business as a whole, the business has never been stronger. Well, the same thing could be said when Hogan was on every other segment of Nitro. And people would be critical of that and say, oh, they should put Jericho in that spot and Rey Mysterio and Eddie Guerrero. And how about this? I agree. Those guys would have better, more competitive matches. However, would the same number of people be watching the show? Probably not. They weren't stars yet. And I understand it's sort of like chicken or the egg at times. But I was just fascinated with that observation from a UFC guy. Doesn't matter if we got 50 guys or 300, we can only have 10 that are over.
But Conrad, isn't that true even in your business, in the mortgage industry?
It's true in every business.
Any sales position?
Yes.
10% of the people are going to make 90% of the money.
Yes.
And it is
the old 80-20 rule.
How many actors and actresses are out there that have amazing talent that we're never going to hear from?
Yeah.
They're never going to hear from because he can't guarantee box office.
Yeah.
They can't mitigate the risk of making a 50 or 60 or $100 million movie or a television series. You're going to go with the known commodity because it's a business. And the top 10% of the actors and actresses out there are probably making 80 or 90% of the money as a result. And the same thing is true in wrestling. You can't, this is not a democracy. This isn't an exercise in democracy. It's an exercise in creating emotion. And you do that with talent that has charisma and with storylines that will support it. It's not just, you said, well, you got to give more TV time. Giving somebody TV time without the foundation of great story and character development actually will work against you. Because it's just TV time for the sake of TV timing, unless it's compelling and interesting and creates emotion, you're boring your audience. They're not going to react to it. You can go out and have all the fucking 5-star matches you want to have. And if it's not creating emotion with the television audience and you're only satisfying that 10 or 15 or 20%, whatever it is, of the Dave Meltzer internet wrestling community that values, competitive matches at the highest level, you're boring 90% of the audience in the process. And MJF is getting the time he deserves. To the point where you're going to be careful you don't overexpose him. You got to keep him special. And that's where the art comes in. And it's how much is too much, how little is too little. Doesn't really matter as long as you have great creative supporting it. And that's the problem. Now you add 300 people on top of it that are under contract, and they're all miserable. In the beginning, they're all happy. They're getting their check in the mail every 2 weeks. They're paying their bills. They're going on vacation, putting money in the bank, investing. All things are all great financially, but that's not the only reason I think that performers, whether they be actors and actresses or musicians or stage actors, they do it for the love of performing. That's what draws them to it. That's what makes them special. And after a while, you get tired of the money. It gets to be a little boring. You're used to it. Your lifestyle has accommodated it, but yet you still have that desire to perform that's not not being satisfied. And that's where, you know, the frustration and the chatter, whether it be in WWE or AEW or anywhere else, it's all the same. It's not exclusive to AEW by any stretch, but that's where you have those conversations with people that are frustrated. And I try to tell people, just, you know, I get calls a couple times a year from people looking for advice.
Yeah.
What would you do? And my advice, especially in WWE, is be ready. Don't let your head get you down. Don't allow yourself to become frustrated and miserable and negative, because all it takes is one idea, LA Knight. All it takes is one situation where somebody gets hurt, or for whatever reason, the story kind of flops, and they're looking for that next person, you know. And there's a lot of talent in WWE right now, or probably in AEW, well, for sure in AEW, that are walking around frustrated and trying to kick their cat and all kinds of other stuff because they're mad at the world. And they don't know, man. They could get a phone call tomorrow and their whole world could change. Just be prepared for that phone call. Be prepared for that opportunity. Don't let up on yourself. Keep working at it. Stay positive. Don't walk around moping and, you know, showing the world how frustrated and disappointed you are and unmotivated you are because things aren't going your way in that moment. Maybe it's not been going your way for 6 months or a year, but you're still there. As long as you're still there, you have an opportunity. You just have to be ready.